coming at you live from Toronto, from Nrwl's office at WeWork here. I've got myself, my esteemed co-founder Victor Savkin, and esteemed also Nrwlian Jason Jean here. And we're going to be talking about NX today. But as a special bonus, we also have the whole company of Nrwl here. Maybe we can take a look and see all the happy faces.
Just faces.
And so we're going to be talking mostly about NX, but we've got a lot of different experts with different expertise from Nrwl here. And so feel free to pop questions in for anything NX or Angular, or if you want to know people's hobbies or what kind of cats we all have, because we're a cat company. No one here has dogs. And, okay, so some of us have dogs. Even Victor has a dog now.
Yeah, I changed. Yeah.
But yeah, so pop questions in. We're going to talk a little bit about NX and the direction of NX and some of the new interesting things. But then we'll have some Q&A time where we'll look at some questions people have submitted ahead of time. And if you want to submit questions as we're going, we'll be keeping an eye on that as well. And we'd love to take a look at those. So without further ado, what is NX? I want Jason to say what NX is.
Jason.
I've heard Victor's.
Yeah, Victor said this a million times.
Yeah.
So NX is a tool which you can use to introduce a monorepo way of doing things into your project. But if you don't need a monorepo, you can also use it for modern tools. So the major things that it gives you are modern tools with Prettier, Jest, Cypress, and those kind of things. But then you can also build a full stack application, and then going from there, you can build a full-blown monorepo with many different types of projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so NX started in 2017, October 2017, I think was the first release, right?
2016.
No. We stared Nrwl in 2016.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah,
it was 2017.
You're right.
So sorry to correct a guest on the show, but.
No, you're right. I'm very bad at dates. I don't remember anything. Keep going.
So it was originally introduced as a way of doing monorepo style development for Angular apps, and it was just Angular apps, and it was at a time when CLI didn't really support multiple projects very well. It kind of had the notion of multiple applications in the same repo, but how has it changed since then? What's the most recent change? I'm leading you to something.
Okay, so the recent change is that it's moved broader than just Angular. When you're building a monorepo, you might want to build with different teams, and those teams might use other frameworks such as React or just like vanilla JavaScript. So recently we've introduced React support and also vanilla.js support. So
vanilla.js, the hottest new library, right?
Yeah, very slim.
Mm-hmm.
Great bundle sizes, lots of work.
So why not, or why include these things? You said it a little bit. But.
Yeah, so I said it a little bit, but organizations many times use multiple frameworks. One team will use Angular and one team will use React. So in a monorepo, it's important to get all those things in the same place. Therefore, you can share code between the two, and you can share ideas as well.
Mm-hmm. So in what ways can you share code between them? Or like a lot of people, when they've seen it, it's like, okay, is it just a matter of we can share dependencies, third-party dependencies, and have a single package JSON, or like how far does it go to actually share things between an Angular project and a React project, for example?
So you can share dependencies as well for external dependencies, but one of the best things you can do is share your business knowledge or business logic. And also, if you wanted to create UI that can be used by both, you can use Angular elements or web components and share those as well. And then also your data types. So many times you'll be displaying the same data, but with different frameworks. So it's important to have those shared between the two as well. And you can go as far as sharing the backend, which a lot of people will do. So they split up their backend into an API layer that multiple applications can use, and they can be written in Angular or React.
So that's the other interesting direction NX has gone. So like there's the horizontal direction of you can build with whatever front-end framework you want, but then there's the vertical direction where it's gotten more into back-end, and I think that's where people are starting to see the power of monorepo, where you can actually share things between the front-end, back-end, and all over the place, and refactorings are easy. Can you talk about the state of the back-end support in NX right now?
So backend support, we started with Node and Express, and then we added in Nest. So we recommend using Nest if you're already familiar to Angular. there's a lot of the same concepts like dependency injection there. But what it allows you to do is share your types between front end and back end, which is important, and then also make sure that you don't break your front end whenever the API changes. So it makes it a lot easier than versioning your API and making sure you don't make breaking changes there, and your front end applications will be more robust because of it.
So one of the key benefits of NX is this monorepo style development. Victor, I'll put this to you. In 30 seconds, how do you describe monorepo style development?
It basically means that you're able to build multiple projects in the same repository, but not naively. Right? Doing it naively would be like basic code co-allocation. If you have 2 folders and you develop them, it will be more than 30 seconds. So I wouldn't count. And,
I don't have a timer on my watch anyway.
If you do it naively, right, it breaks down, or like it breaks apart very quickly once you start having a second team building an independent project. Right? You sort of step on each other's toes. You either rebuild everything and then your CI breaks for reasons unrelated to a project. It gets slower and slower. Basically, it becomes unmanageable. So a lot of folks who have negative experience with monorepos don't have the experience with the Google-style monorepo, where you have like an intelligent understanding of the graph of projects you're trying to build, where it only rebuilds what needs to be rebuilt, it only retests what needs to be retested. So if you're building your own independent project that depends on nothing, you're basically as fast, as independent as you would be without a monorepo, with having your own repo, right? You don't lose very much, right? So that's point number one. The second point is when we say monorepo, to our clients, for example, almost every team we introduce the idea to say, but I heard monolith is bad, right? Which is, that's an unfortunate name about monorepo. It should have been said like mega repo or unirepo, something that doesn't have the mono in it, because monorepo is not the same as a monolith. In no way putting code in the same repo forces you to build the whole code base and deploy it to like at once, right? And we know it already, right? If you imagine a Google-style monorepo that contains most of Google projects, not all of them get deployed on the same day at the same time, obviously, right? So we already intuitively know it when we think about it at a large scale. For some reason, when we look at a smaller scale, we're going to get confused, right? If anything, having a monorepo allows you to deploy independently better, right? You actually have more flexibility about deploying individual pieces because you understand the graph of projects in much more detail, right? So to recap, a monorepo is a way to build multiple projects in the same repository with advanced tooling that allows you to deal with the dependency graph and manage the dependency graph and rebuild and retest only what's affected. Second, monorepo is not the same as a monolith. So if anyone tells you, I don't want to build another Rails app because of the disaster, sure, I mean, I'm with you, right? You don't have to, right? In case you want an X monorepo, because it's so easy to create individual projects and develop and deploy them independently, you can actually go full-blown, microservice architecture and have 20 microservices developed, deployed independently, right? And then consume them from your front-end app that you built in the same repo as well.
All right, that's all the time we have. Thank you, everybody. I'm just kidding. But that was more than 30 seconds. So Angular CLI version 6 more specifically added much better support. It added a whole lot of cool things. So it added like the architect, the builders, I think came in 6. Right. Schematics was more stable. Schematics existed before 6, but
yeah.
And update schematics I think were introduced in version 6, right? So lots of new things. And so with first class multiple project support, a lot of people ask, okay, so NX is pointless now, right? Because we can have multiple projects in an Angular workspace. Well, like, how would you describe the nuance, or not even nuance, the difference between a vanilla Angular CLI project or multiple project workspace and an NX workspace?
Yeah, I can describe it. So
we have 45 seconds this time.
Yeah, so it boils down to the same distinction I introduced 30 seconds ago, which is you can have multiple projects in the same repository that are truly independent, that your tools don't have understanding of how they relate to each other, or you can have a system that understands how those projects relate to each other and how they are composed into larger projects, right? So Angular CLI allows you to create multiple projects. The problem there is that if you do it, and you say you have a graph of 100 projects, right? If you have a large app, like a portal-like app, it can be composed of it can be built by like 10 different teams. Every team can create, lots of libraries. Some of them are shared, some of them are not. It's not unreasonable to say that a sizable project, a sizable enterprise app can be composed of 100 libs, right? So managing those 100 libs yourself is not possible, right? I mean, technically everything is possible, but in practice it does not work, right? So what you need there is an ability to say that I can delegate the management of the graph to this tool, right? And next is that layer on top of the CLI that allows you to manage this graph.
And what we see in projects that are monoliths is that they have things that should be libraries, but aren't libraries because of the cost.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, if you have an Angular CLI project with multiple projects, a workspace with multiple projects, in reality, you are limited to, I don't know, a very few. We're talking about like a handful at best. Right? Anything beyond that is not going to be managed well, right? It will fall apart. So you have to have extra tooling that will allow you to say, I touch something in this vast graph of projects that at the end, is my application or my applications. I need to know what needs to be retested and rebuilt intelligently, right? That's what Nrwl is this level of intelligence, right? That actually makes monorepo style development possible, right? Because if you don't have it, it is not possible, right? You basically just have two projects that just happen to be in the same repo. You just have code co-allocation, right? That's fine, that can be useful, but it's not what we're talking about here, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, so what are and I'm asking a question I know the answer to, just like everything else I'm asking, but what are the most common objections you hear to monorepo style development?
Right, so there are a couple. The first one, which is I already kind of covered, which is I don't want to deploy everything together, monolith, yada yada. So we already talked about it. There is fundamentally those two things: the way you store your code and how you deploy are divorced. Two separate independent concerns. That is the objection. It's very easy to refute. The second objection is my CI will be slower. Right? People are like, oh, if I have a lot of code, my CI already takes 30 minutes. I don't want it to take 5 hours. You have the fear of CI getting slower, and that is actually in the case of an Nrx monorepo, I think it's the reverse. That is often true. That your CI, the average CI time, will probably be faster. And the reason is you don't have to build or rerun all your tasks all the time, because we actually know what part of your project or your workspace is affected by your change. So we can run a small part of the graph, right? We can say you run 10% of the tasks, and the result,
and how does it work? Or how does it know what's affected?
Okay, so the way it works is, let me finish with objections, then I'll cover that. So that's the second objection. The CI can be slow. In reality, it won't be slower, right? If anything, on average, it's faster. The third objection, which is a bit more reasonable, is that what about ownership, right? If I have my own repo right now, and I'm the only one who's an admin, have write access, Jason can just go and screw up with my repo, so I feel protected, right? That part is true, right? And if you do monorepo naively, you can lose that, and again, you'll have very bad time. So introducing code ownership, knowing who owns what part of the repo, so that person has to approve PRs, change that part of the repo is important, right? That's a reasonable objection, but it's very easy to make it work, right? Most modern day tools like GitHub, for example, provide you a way to introduce code ownership. It works just fine. Even more so, without the monorepo setup, you still have a flexibility. Like I'm building my own library in a polyrepo setup. Jason sneaks in from behind and starts depending on it in his package to Jason. I don't know about it, right? He's touching
sneaky.
Yeah, he's introducing the dependency in his own package to Jason, which he controls, right? So what I have is I, without knowing, is dependent right now by Jason, right? So I cannot break my API because Jason will be broken. He'll be unhappy. If in some organization, someone, some manager who is the manager of both of us is going to be introduced in this conversation and will prevent me from breaking Jason, right? And I'm unhappy, everyone's unhappy. It's sadness. In case of a monorepo, you actually have control over who depends on who, right? You can add rules saying that this library is mine. Jason cannot depend on this library in principle, right? So if anything, right, it gives you more control, but it needs to be thought through ahead of time, right? So you need to configure it a little bit. So it's not automatic, right? But it's definitely, tooling is definitely there. Like Connect support this type of tooling for the reasons that without it, if you do it naively with just Angular CLI plain or with something like Learner, essentially it will fall apart, right? We just won't scale beyond the most simple setup, right? So that's another objection which is reasonable. And I mean, there are a handful of others. Some people just like doing their own thing. They're like, oh, I have to type the same command as Jason. Screw it, I'm leaving, right? I have to type a different command, right? Things like that are a bit harder to overcome in that monorepo, the Nrx in particular, or even Google monorepo with Blaze/Bazel, right? works if we all agree on certain foundation of how projects relate to each other and stuff like that. Right? The foundation has to be respected. So that is a reasonable objection, in that you lose some of the freedom in that. You have to at least buy into certain tooling, into monorepo tooling, right, for you to be part of the monorepo. But it's not that expensive it's not that fundamental, right? You can still invoke your own scripts, you can do whatever you want to do, you have to respect and go through the special tooling that we introduce, right? Going back to your question, how do we know? And that's a key part, right? I strongly believe in the statement that the ease of use trumps everything else, right? You can be super robust, consistent, beautifully architected, intellectually very pleasing to look at, but if it's hard to use, it sucks, right? No one is going to use it. And you can see it, for example, in AngularJS world. When AngularJS came out, the first one that is, one can argue it wasn't as beautiful as some, some pure functional programming system, but a lot more elegant and stuff like that. Here it was messy, dealt with HTML, which is messy. It was a lot of messy things, but it was easy to use, right? You can throw it on a page, your page lights up, things becomes, like the ease of use was the main selling point for me personally when AngularJS, it was introduced. So NX is trying to do the same in the sense that we are trying to make our users not to deal with configuration until they really have to, right? For example, we use advanced code analysis to look at the workspace and figure out the dependencies between different parts of the workspace, so we know the graph that we're dealing with, right? We cannot do it 100% correct in all the time. Sometimes we miss certain edges, right? Meaning that our graph is incomplete, right? All the edges we have are legit edges. We can miss certain edges, right, in the graph, and the user has an ability to provision those. So we are going like 95% of the way, maybe 97% of the way. And at the last 3%, sometimes you need to adjust and say, even though you don't see this relationship, actually, let's say if you have an API, the backend and the front end in the same repo, from the source code point of view, they're completely divorced, right? They have nothing to do with each other, but you can say actually the front end depends on the backend in an indirect way, right? Because at runtime, it hit the backend to get the data, right? So the schemas has to match, right? So if you change the backend, we actually need to rerun end-to-end tests for the front end.
I think one of the things we see with clients is, so usually people come around seeing the benefits, but there is a real cost to adopting monorepo style development, or at least there's an upfront cost. It's a big paradigm shift.
Yeah, so you're right. So like organizational cost is very high. I think tech-wise, if you're using the Angular CLI, very similar. It is an extension to the Angular CLI right now. And but organizational cost in that you have to collaborate. You have to live in the same space with a team who you may not like or may not know, right? So like there is an organization cost for sure, right? And the way you develop, like some teams prefer developing and using like long running branches. They have like a 2-month branch where someone is hacking away on something, right? You can still do it in a monorepo style with a monorepo style development. In principle, it works, but you lose some of the benefits in that if you share a lot of code, you actually want to integrate stuff more frequently. So like something like trunk-based development, which is better anyhow, I think, for most projects. It's just a lot more, it's much better fit than the long-running branch stuff.
So here's a question I actually don't know the answer to or don't know much about, which is Lerna. So Lerna is another tool that people use to get this kind of monorepo-like development with many repositories, bringing them into the same idea of a workspace, and also our workspaces kind of fit into this as well. What's different about the approach, or what are the trade-offs of NX style monorepo development versus Lerna?
Okay, so
okay, I can take this. So Lerna is good at managing multiple package.jsons, basically. You can co-locate all your code, which is a benefit. It's great for that, and it's also great for deploying libraries when you just want to deploy a whole set of different libraries based on the package.jsons. But where it falls flat is the intelligence that Victor was talking about. When you scale to 100 different projects, you don't want to be running all those different tasks at once. So you need the intelligence that NX provides to analyze the source code and derive the dependencies, which Lerna doesn't do.
Yep.
Yeah, I think how does Lerna, or do you have the idea of atomic commits with Lerna? Like,
that type of stuff would still work similarly in that that works with any code co-location as long as you're in the same repo, right? You're able to do it.
By that I mean like where you can have a single revision that maps across all dependencies that you can point to and say, okay, everything is locked together at the same time.
Yeah, that works in a very similar way. I mean, if you look at, I think, a better way, like Yarn workspaces, which is a kind of similar to Learn in some way, right? You get same benefits where, because in the same repo, right? You have a single, if you're, you have a single history, right? So you still have a commit that points to the stable state of the repo, right? But again, there is no, you don't have the intelligence. But I want to add that in principle, you could use things like Yarn workspaces with an NX workspace, which we actually do ourselves. Our private monorepo that we as an organization maintain uses Yarn workspaces, so we have we use both, right? Because at the end of the day, one is good at managing node modules and making sure you don't install the same thing 20 different times, right? That's like Yarn workspaces / learner, right? And what we are good at with NX is providing intelligence that allows you to manage projects within a workspace.
All right, cool. So we talked about monorepo. What's coming up with NX? Let's talk about what's the cool secret stuff that's coming up?
Sure.
There is no secret stuff.
There is no secret. Yeah, there's no secret about it. So there are a couple of things that are pretty cool. So at this point, what we have, right, with NX is a system that allows you to develop, as you pointed out, across different frameworks, across the stack, vertically or horizontally. That stuff works. What we're doing now is we're trying to make that way of developing a bit more first class, because right now, because we slowly evolved it, right? Like if you, for example, just want to use NX to build a React project that we just have React and nothing else, right? You can have a little bit of sort of Angular here and there hiding, right? It won't affect your project. If your React project will work just fine, but the setup you have won't be 100% clean, right? So we are repartitioning our packaging to account for that, right? To make sure that if you just start with a React project, right, you may not even know you are in an Angular CLI project, right? Yeah, you run NJ, but other than that, right, you don't see anything Angular. It's a React workspace, but only React stuff is going on, right? As one of our Twitter followers, probably not followers, Twitter enemies, was mentioning that, it's a church of Redux or whatever, right? So you like the purity of your setup, right, will preserve, right? That's important for some folks. It's not important to Jason. Jason and I keep arguing about it like almost every day, where he's like, it shouldn't really matter. A person who looks at it shouldn't care, but people do care. So we want to make sure that experience is a bit more first class. Another thing that's common is we want to provide a set of schematics for React that is, it won't be a match for the Angular one because we're doing different things, but we would allow you to craft your application, these basic blocks of the application quite effectively, right? For example, right now we're able to generate libraries and applications, but you should be able to generate just components, some state management stuff. And if you generate components, you want to use hooks depending on how hip you are or whatever, right? So things like that, we want to make available sort of as soon as possible because the foundation is already there, right? This is a little bit of sweet stuff on top of the cake, right? That makes it a lot more attractive to developers from other communities is what we're focused on right now.
Something I want to add is that by making everything first class, we also introduced the opportunity to have plugins that are like maybe not managed by us, so we can introduce support easily for things like Vue in the future or native script, something like that.
Right. Yep. Or Java. I develop all my Java in the next one.
That's actually a good question that comes up a lot is, so we talk about node backends or you get the affected features with JavaScript, but what about people who have Java or C# and they're thinking about having them in the same repo? Does NX do anything for that? Or
I mean, it does a little bit. I would say it does. I mean, because basically the way the CLI works is when you want to do something to a project, say like build or test it or run end-to-end test against it or lint it, you can say what it means. When it's an ng build, you can say when I point to a particular project, the build would mean a particular thing, right? So when you build an Angular app, we're using the Angular Teams builder, the one that they provide. When you build a React app, we have our own builder, which does the React stuff, right? So in principle, if you build and we have some generic builders that just invoke bash, okay, that's like, it just works, right? So in this case, if you have a Java app, you either use a generic like bash builder and just invoke like Gradle from there, right? Or you wrap Gradle into it's on builder, which is not that difficult, right? And then that part would work. So your Java project would become just a node in its graph of dependencies. You can build it, test it, it's fine, because NX doesn't care what you have in there, right? Where you would lose some of the magic is that the auto detection right now, the one we have, works only for JavaScript or TypeScript files, right? So it doesn't matter what JavaScript or TypeScript stuff you throw in there. Any framework, right? It would work. If you throw anything else, you would have to provision the edges yourself to that node and say, my Java app, for example, is a dependency of that app, right? So in a way, it's kind of similar to what you would have to do if you use tools like Bazel, right? Like naked Bazel, where you still have to maintain the graph, right? You are the author of the graph, right? So it's not that bad. So if you have a team that has a Java backend, you can throw it in there. Usually, you won't have 20 different JavaScript libraries depending on it, right? Usually, you have very few edges pointing to that Java backend. You just provision those in the configuration file, and it works in the same way. So it's not limited to TypeScript or JavaScript. It works, in general with any technology you would want to work with.
Cool. So I'll take some questions that folks submitted ahead of time, and we're getting some good questions live too. So one is what about non-web based apps like Ionic or Electron, native script?
So right now there's a tool that's built on top of NX called XPlat. So they provide support for Electron and native script apps. So you can look into that. It's built on top of NX, which is built on top of English CLI. So you get everything you love, but with native script.
Yeah, it's got some cool features too. Nathan Walker and other folks work on that. It's pretty neat. Yeah, I think it was pretty soon after NX.
It was surprisingly well timed. I don't know. I was like, how fast is he? That he's like, I'll use this. Done.
Yeah, but it's cool. Yeah, lots of folks are using that.
So you can check that out, and I think in the future we might integrate more closely, especially after we kind of modularize NX to be able to take in plugins.
Right.
That might be one.
So another interesting, if you want to see Electron with NX, we have a repository, open source repository for Angular console that is an NX workspace with Electron apps and Visual Studio Code.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, one interesting thing, we have a Java stuff in there as well. Here you go. It has everything.
What's the Java stuff?
The secret plugin we can talk about in a bit.
Sure. So the other, let's see, which one did I just ask? Yeah, so we talked a little bit about wiring it back. Oh, here's a good question. So if you have multiple apps that share the same kind of themes or styles, how do you share those between apps and then NX workspace? So this is something that goes beyond functional code, beyond TypeScript, JavaScript, Java, anything like that. It's CSS. Does NX do anything for that, or how do you manage that?
So for the Angular builder, they have a way to kind of alias your styles paths. So what I would say is that it makes sense to put it into a separate library and then alias the path so that they direct you to the right library. Keeping it in one library for everything to share would make sense.
And is it a good idea to wire that up to your graph so that change it? So, but you would have to manually provision that, right? So to say that when this library changes.
Right. You would have to manually provision that. Right now, Affected only detects edges within TypeScript.
Or JavaScript.
Or JavaScript, right? But you can use implicit dependencies to create those edges yourself. And it'll show up and it'll cause everything to rebuild. Therefore, you can do end-to-end testing whenever the core styles change.
Yeah, we have our own private monorepo as well that we do a lot of our development in, and we share common assets like images and other files through that. And so we just have it where in our Angular.json we provision the assets configuration for each application that needs those, and it works pretty well. So that's a good one. Here's another common one. So with monorepo style development, there's an idea called single version policy that avoids pain. It keeps people on the same version of third-party dependencies as well as first-party dependencies. Naturally, everything is first-party at the same revision. Is there a way to escape that? Or so one, I guess, is at the root. Is there a way to escape it? That's an easy question. But is there support for different applications or different projects inside the repo to have their own package.jsons or their own separate versions of third-party dependencies.
Yeah, I would say you could escape it, and it might even make sense in the early days if you're migrating multiple repos into a monorepo for you to escape it. There's nothing stopping you from putting a package.json within each library or application. It'll complicate the way the module resolution will work. You might be unexpecting like multiple different versions of Angular in your apps or libs, like not working with each other, but it's definitely possible. I would just be careful of introducing incompatibilities.
Right.
And if you can, at all costs, like stay towards having one version of all your dependencies. But sometimes it's just not possible when you're moving multiple different repos that have existed for many years to all the one single dependency graph.
Yep.
So another good question. So Angular 8 is just around the corner. Presumably we're weeks away from the stable release. Who knows? Does it bring any changes to NX, or does NX version 8 have anything interesting in store?
So Angular CLI team is working on a couple of different things that might make our lives easier. One of them is redoing the architect API. So the definition of what a builder is changing. I mean, it's always been experimental. So the first stable version is going to be out soon, which might improve NX in certain ways. A lot of things they're doing.
Is there anything that users of NX will see, or more that we can remove some hacks?
Users probably won't see a difference. I think what they will see is an improvement in build times with affected. Right now, we kind of invoke the Angular CLI to do all these things. It's simpler for us to do that, but if they introduce this change, it'll make it easier to invoke the underlying architect easily. So other than that, they're implementing like experimental Bazel support, experimental Ivy support, so you can play with that easily without having us make the change for you. So all experimental, but it'll hopefully come out in version 8.
Cool. So we had another question. How can we all get our beards as luxurious as Jeff's? And actually, if I started using a new beard oil and it's scented, I think it's like sandalwood scented. Victor, do you want to verify?
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
It's shinier. So I forget what brand it is. Actually, Mike Hardington had some good brands that he recommends. So you might tweet at Mike Hardington to ask how he does his, because his is actually better than mine these days. All right. Thank you for asking, Bonnie. So, here's one. So if people don't like monorepos, which, it's each their own, we all have the right to be wrong about things.
Yeah, that's what I usually say. I'm very pro, like you make your own choices. I'm not going to force you. Actually, there are two ways to, and I thought about it for a long time, and there are two ways to make people do what you want. What is good, that is. Because what you want is probably what's good. Otherwise, why wouldn't you want it, right?
Exactly. Everyone is good-hearted.
Actually, that's a point that I can defend genuinely. So, but let's stay about that. And the one way is you can use force. You can just force them to use monorepo, or even an argument. Argument is still force, right? If you argue with someone and provide an argument, they read in the argument, it's still force. It's just, different type of force. A better way is to make it easier, right? So, and easier meaning that you don't need to use force. They naturally will go in there, right? Because it's easier than not to, right? And a famous example would be if you want to donate your organs, right? If the form says yes by default, the majority of people do it because it's easier not to change the choice on the form, right? So with NX, it's similar. On one side, like if you don't want to use monorepo, that's fine. So we want to make it easier for you to use NX, even if you without any convinced about why monorepos are great. You dislike them, it's fine. You didn't get the point about monoliths and monorepos, that's fine. NX gives you more stuff that makes the development easier, such as support for Jest, Cypress, Prettier, things like that, right? Because if you want to build your Angular CLI like a single CLI project, a single project, no libs, no backends, just one thing, right? In a monolith style development, actually paradoxically, because you're not using monorepo. And you want to use Jest and Cypress, it's actually hard to set it up correctly, right? Naively, people can throw it together like, oh, look, it works, right? But then source maps don't work exactly right, watching doesn't work. It's not easy, right? So if you choose to use Cypress, for example, Doing it without an X is a lot of effort. Doing it with an X is zero effort. It's a default, right? If you create an app, Cypress just appears, right? And so I would say if you just want to use one of those modern tools that we just ship with, right? Just use it, because you don't pay anything. Like your mental model doesn't get more complicated if you don't have, if your graph it has just one node, right? If you just one thing you're building, you run same commands you run with a normal CLI project. Nothing changes, and apart from your using Cypress and Jest, right? Which I think are just better tools for testing.
Yeah, that said, so I use NX for even if I'm just building a simple app.
Yeah.
The paradigms of separating things in the libraries, once you get hooked on it, then you never want anything to actually be in the physical app folder. You want to have almost everything else in libraries.
Yep.
I've got a couple of Angular console questions. Maybe Dan, you want to take it? So one is, when will we see love for other IDEs other than Visual Studio Code?
Why would you love other IDEs? Kidding.
Victor, for what reason, loves WebStorm?
No, Victor's been prodding me about this, I mean, for a long time, because Victor's a man who likes perfect tools, and he's identified a perfect tool in his mind.
The one true tool.
The one true tool came down from above and saved us all, and it's called WebStorm, apparently. So we have an external contributor who's this awesome dude who's just basically making it for us, and we're like helping him out. But I give all the credit to him, and it should be out like this month.
Frantisek, is it Frantisek?
I don't know. The reason I wasn't saying it is because I don't know how to pronounce it.
So I'm sure he'll forgive.
Let's try to pronounce it.
Frantisek is how it's spelled.
Frantisek. Yeah, Frantisek is my bud. He gave me advice on how to fix my back. He's just an all-around good guy. Everybody should give him props on Twitter. But yeah, IntelliJ soon. One of the notable.
Frantisek Kolar. Shout out to
Frantisek Kolar. But the one cool thing about the IntelliJ plugin is when we do release it, it'll be faster and snappier than the VS Code one. The VS Code one, we launched it with a bit of performance issues because of some limitations that we encountered when making it. But it'll be as snappy as the Electron version, which is very, very fun. And I think it's a really, really nice user experience overall.
Yeah, wonderful, I told you.
Yeah.
So the other Angular console question was, people have seen us demo the affected graph visual feature in Angular console.
Oh, sure.
That works with NX spaces. When will they see that?
Well,
where is it?
They would have seen it a lot sooner, but we're a company for profit, and so we hid it behind a paywall. But then we had to change a part. We went from chaotic evil to chaotic neutral. Maybe chaotic good. I don't know. But anyway, it wasn't working, so we pivoted, and now there is no paywall. And so anybody can register for Nrwl Connect, which is our
You can sign up for early access.
You can sign up for early access.
Can't yet register for it, but soon.
Okay. What Jeff said. But if you do that, then all of a sudden you log in, boom, get this fancy little graph.
Yeah, so go to connect.nrwl.io and sign up, and soon, shortly-ish. All good things from Nrwl Connect will be available too.
Yeah, but it's nice. Our Nrwlian Jack Hsu made it, and you can see the graph, but you can also build, test, and lints. All the affected commands you can do from the little graph, which is nice.
It's super powerful to be able to interact with to see your dependency graph and interact with it and do things with it.
And for the first time, it's not in GraphViz, so it's actually readable. It's not like you have this huge thing where you need to zoom out to 10% so you can try to find where your app is. Jack did a good job. Not that GraphViz is bad, it's just it's a hard problem, and Jack is better than GraphViz. That's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. All right, that's all for
all right, bye.
That's all so let's see, we got a couple more. So the one person asked about the Enterprise Angular Mono Repo book. Nitin, do you want to? So people have asked, are we going to see updates? Yeah, you come up here and just say yes, we will update it, or no, we will never update it, or maybe what our plans are with it. So Nitin is the author. If you haven't seen our book, Nitin, Victor, and Thomas Burleson worked on a book that basically lays out the patterns we've seen work well with monorepo with NX, called Enterprise Angular Monorepo Patterns. I don't remember the order of words, but those are the 4 words that make up the title.
It's based on the old names when Martin Fowler was still writing good books. It has this 7 words that you can't pronounce, and then we just use the abbreviation.
Yeah, the best books have terrible titles because you know the substance must be good if they didn't care about the title.
Exactly.
All right, so what's in store for the book?
So there have been quite a lot of movement in NX, so there's quite a lot of content that we have to put in. So I think over the next couple of months we'll put out an update, but in the meantime we do have nx.dev that we revamped with quite a bit of increased documentation, and also we have our upcoming Nrwl Connect product. So
yeah, nx.dev. When did we launched a new one? Weeks ago.
I think a month ago.
So we moved NX. NX was just on the docs were on a page inside of Nrwl.io, but we moved it to its own site because it's its own project, stands on its own, and in the process the docs got revamped, totally rewritten from scratch. Lots of great content there. It's really amazing. Even I enjoy it. It's got nice tutorials, quizzes, and things.
Yeah, interactive tutorials.
Yeah, so it's a really cool site now that. Read the book to get like the end-to-end and understand like how to actually apply NX, and then go to NXDev to learn all the other interesting things about it. And then Nrwl Connect. Yeah, sign up for Nrwl Connect and you'll get access to lots more fun stuff. I like how Victor found a way to escape the camera.
I just want to be like Robert Fripp, the famous guitarist. You always sit in the dark. You can always see him. You can always see like sometimes his guitar appears, disappears. That's fantastic.
Stretcher the mic. Are you going to talk about this for a minute, Robert?
No.
Vic, for those who couldn't hear, he was telling us about some guitars I didn't know. All right, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nitin. Let's see. Here's a broad question that I'm sure there are lots of opinions on. How do people know what state management strategy they should choose for their application?
Oh yeah, I need to come back to that one.
So state
Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yeah, now I'm here.
Okay. How do people choose their state management strategy? There are a lot of choices now.
Yeah, there are a lot of choices, that's true. So when we started working on Angular 2x and 2 plus, or just Angular, we try to make it work with the state management approach that work in Angular.js space, right? Where you can sort of create a service, mutate some stuff in the service and manage your state that way. Some people call it the use case service approach. I call it the use case. Some people. Anyway, but essentially, like you have a service for your use case, right? And that service manages state for that use case, right? And it actually works quite well. But around that time, Redux, which was influenced by functional programming patterns, right? Where you have to do what Redux does. You have no choice but do that, right? Became huge, right? And as a result, in the Angular space, we had Redux for Angular, which kind of worked fine, and I think regular folks maintain that, and it's a fantastic tool. But around that time, Rob Wormold, I think it was Rob, right? He's a very interesting guy who just sits somewhere in his house, unshaved, just runs around, right, collecting motorcycles, and once in a while he produces like a fantastic piece of software, right? So he's like a true artist, right? I'm not a true artist. Like I am at best craftsman, and he's a true artist. So he came up with NRX as an Angular take on Redux, right? Where some of the basic ideas are still there, but the API is a lot more Angular friendly, and it takes advantage of observables a lot more directly, right? And so NRX became the de facto way of managing state in the Angular space. While this was happening, GraphQL was getting bigger and bigger, right? Because GraphQL existed since like the days of yesteryear, right? It's old, but around like a couple of years ago, lots of companies started switching to using GraphQL, right? And for good reasons. I think GraphQL provides a lot of benefit that you don't get if you manage your state sort of directly, right? As you do with NRX. So tools like Apollo appeared, right? Especially Apollo Angular, right? And it took some time for those tools to become widely used. But at this point, they are widely used, right? A lot of companies use Apollo Angular. So you have a bunch of options. You can do traditional AngularJS way, basically ad hoc state management. You have NRX, which is a structured way to manage state, but requires sort of a lot of manual massaging, to make the state exactly right. And Apollo, which automatically does a lot of it, right? And so those are your options. I would say personally, if your organization can use Apollo and GraphQL, if you like, because it requires some buy-in from the backend. Usually, it's an unusual tool. The learning curve is quite steep. Once if you are able to get buy-in and say this is the way we're doing it, I would say it's probably the best way, in a sense that you don't have the boilerplate or whatever that usually people associate with Nginx, right? The code looks smaller and cleaner, right? And you have fantastic tooling. You can talk to your API directly, query it, interact with it. Just lots of nice things you get for free. You get caching for free on the client side, and you can get optimistic updates working in no time, right? In minutes, where it requires some massaging to make it work in Nginx. It's possible, it just requires no effort. So I would say Apollo and GraphQL is my new favorite, right? It's what we use internally for all our projects, right? So it's not it's justified, right? We use Nginx mostly for internal projects these days. It's basically Apollo.
So does it give you anything, or what does Apollo give you in terms of if I have an app that's heavily client-side information or client-side data that needs to be managed? Is there would Apollo give me much? Because my experience with Apollo is mostly with backend.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So if most of your state management is client-side, you can still use Apollo because you can have an engine running on a client that will manage in exactly the same way. You can write stuff to the store, query it in the same way. There are also tools on top of Apollo, such as Luna, that kind of provide more of that, right? So you can sort of complement the built-in Apollo stuff. So I would say even if your state management is very client-side heavy, it's still a fantastic tool, but it really shines when you need to talk to the backend, right? Once you start talking to the backend, lots of things get simpler. And both Nginx and Apollo have one strength that I like, in that they manage state in a very database-like fashion, right? Where you have mutations, that you submit that apply in a particular way. You query it using the language, right? That allows you to, in case of Nginx, selectors, which are very query-like, right? In case of Apollo, you just have a special language, the GraphQL query language that allows you to get this stuff. Both of them are fantastic. Just Apollo does a lot of it for you automatically, hence the steeper learning curve, because you need to understand what it does a little bit to use it effectively. But if you do, then you just your code gets smaller, right? It looks neater and cleaner.
Yeah, I love how much GraphQL in general, but with Apollo, how it puts components in control of saying what they want from the API.
Yeah, exactly.
I want these objects and these properties specifically. And then if you ever want to change your API, you know who's affected by it, instead of having one common giant object in a service that different people are depending on different parts of that object.
Right. And a few things to note, in addition to just being a fantastic tool for just querying stuff, modern tools on top of GraphQL and Apollo allow you to generate types based on your schema. So when you look at your TypeScript code, you interact with TypeScript types, it's always type checked, right? You never author a query by hand, right? All of this stuff is done for you. So as a result, you very rarely, almost never see a runtime error due to a mismatch on the client and the server, right? They're always in sync. It works surprisingly well, which also, in addition, it works well with the monolith, because then your generated types can be put in the lib that your backend and the front can consume, and it's everything is fantastic.
So we had, kind of changing gears, we had some questions about schematics and NX schematics. So one is, so we have the ability to generate your own custom schematics. Is that going to evolve? Are we going to start treating schematics as a first-class, top-level thing, the same as we do with apps and libs, or is that changing at all with NX?
I'm not sure what it means to be on the same level with apps and libs. I think in general they are not the same level, because they're your tools. The people working on the repo are the only people that are using it, whereas an app and a lib are distributed to your users. But right now it is possible to generate your own schematics, which you can use within your organization. Say you want a different type of, like a React component, you can write your own workspace schematic. So it allows you to kind of put your own practices and your own best practices to solidify within your workspace, because it's easier, as Victor said. You're not going to write your own code just to do it differently. You can use a workspace schematic that your team wrote to generate code.
Right.
But if you clarify, make a GitHub issue, and we can You can take a look.
Yeah, one thing is like for a project, one of the projects we're working on is where we've integrated Storybook into the workspace, like a nice playground for interacting with components and documenting components, and we've worked on a schematic that will generate the components and set up Storybook for the component, add stories for it, and that kind of thing. So every developer who wants to add a component can just run the custom schematic and everything is set up. They don't have to do anything by hand. It's really cool.
Yep.
So another question unrelated to that one is Ivy. So Angular Ivy we've been talking about for a while, and it's coming out.
Yeah.
Is it going to change? There are a couple of questions. So one is it going to affect NX in any way, or like materially will people have to change anything to work with Ivy? And the second is, will it improve? What will improve in terms of build times? Because a lot of people, especially the companies we work with, have massive apps, like pretty large apps, lots of people working on them. And build times can be painful, even as things get optimized under the hood. It's still kind of painful. And how will Ivy affect that?
Sure, I can take it. So I was going to make a joke that Ivy is new Angular too, where it's like it's close, it's close, but not exactly there. But I'm looking forward to it. I like the design a lot. I like the way it works under the hood. You know, the principles upon which it's built, I think, are very solid. So I'm very happy with how it works. I'm very excited about it. I'm excited about it mainly not for perf reasons, because people usually talk about Ivy when like, oh, I can tree shake super hard. And like, yes, for like web components, whatnot, like tree shaking would work better with Ivy, because the way it works is you don't need an interpreter to interpret your template kind of stuff, right? But what I'm excited the most is the simplification of tooling, right? Because non-trivial projects that a lot of our clients build require sophisticated multi-layer build things that deploy a quarter of a project, something like crazy stuff, right? Basically, anytime you want to build a portal, right, and you want to build different parts of the portal independently, right, with some other parts that depend on your part, right, and the deployment is that section, like that stuff, right? Right now, you have to do workarounds, right, to make that use case work well, right? And it works with an X. We know the workarounds you have to put in there to make it work, but it's a bit painful. So Ivy will remove that pain, right? Because the build process is so much more streamlined. Being able to load smaller chunks of code, it's just much easier.
I'm trying not to sneeze.
That's fine.
I won't sneeze on you.
That's important.
Mm-hmm.
So that part is what I'm most excited about. The second part would be like metaprogramming capabilities, so you can like author code sort of in a more concise manner. When it comes to perf, if you're rebuilding the whole thing from scratch, right? I mean, it's not going to be like a gazillion times faster if you do it with Ivy, because the idea of Ivy, the emphasis there is on incrementality, right? So yeah, dev process can improve, right, if you're rebuilding small sections of your application. But if you're rebuilding everything, like if you're starting like how a code built, right, it's still going to be quite slow, right? It's not going to become automatically a lot faster. The Ivy stuff will work in the next workplace just out of the box, and the reason is that NX is a tool on top of the CLI, and to my knowledge, there is nothing in the CLI that doesn't work with NX. I mean, it's possible to author something in the CLI intentionally so it breaks in the next workspace, but you need to try. So almost anything that Angular CLI, the new version of the Angular CLI will have, should work without a single change in the next workspace. So if you want to create an application and select Ivy as a renderer, you can do it. It will work just fine.
Cool. So here's a good one in response to talking about Apollo. So somebody has an NX workspace with NGRX. How would they go about converting to Apollo?
Right. So
will we ever have first-class Apollo support in NX?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. So let me cover both. First of all, let me make it clear that NGRX is a fantastic tool. Even if it works for you, don't just switch tools. Like it's just not good, right? If something works for you, you find that you're productive, right? Stick with it. Yeah. It's more important to be consistent. So some organizations that have like 5 teams, and one person in one team will be like, I really want to use Apollo, right? Even though it's a better tool maybe for the team and the person, you need to weigh it against having the beautiful uniformity where everyone uses the same state management tool. So when you browse the code base, it all looks similar. So
Yeah, that's one of the aspects of monorepo we didn't talk about much was the developer portability, that I can easily contribute to any app other than my primary app.
Yeah, exactly.
In a monorepo.
Yeah. So so I wouldn't say just switch to Apollo if you like it. No, you need to weigh it against lots of other things that might be important. When we were going to add support for Apollo, it's a good question because the NGRX support in NX is optional. So it's only when you start, if you generate an NGRX state using the schematic we provide, we're going to add dependencies, and do whatever needs to be done to make it work. If you don't use NGRX, if you don't generate NGRX state piece, right, there is no NGRX in the workspace. So it's NGRX-less, right? Whether we'll provide Apollo schematic, it's a good, or whatever is required for Apollo is a good question because Apollo means different things, right? Like the Angular support for Apollo is one thing, the React support for Apollo is a different thing. The Nest.js in the backend supports Apollo in one way, the Express supports in a different way. So it's not like Apollo is like a universal, goodness you can add to any project and somehow it becomes full of Apollo. It's very technology specific, right? So I would prefer someone else in the community to do it. But the reality, like if it doesn't happen quickly enough, we might do it because we use Apollo everywhere, right? So at this point, we might as well just have a special way to generate Apollo state management for your application. So we don't have to repeat ourselves over and over again, right?
Because we're selfish. We just build what we want.
Yeah, I genuinely that the world moves forward on individuals pursuing their self-interest, right? That's basically what it is.
But actually, it is one of the main benefits of NX is that we build it based on the work we're doing with clients and ourselves. So it's solving real problems.
Yeah, exactly. None of us were sitting in a tower, the ivory tower that is, of architects, architecting things, looking far down and speaking on peasants.
We do that, to be clear. That's just not how we come up with what's
yeah, so we do that a little bit. But the NX is sort of is more like it actually came from experience. We do something multiple times. Like, okay, we did it like 5 times. It seems to be useful. It's about the same all 5 times. Maybe we can try to generalize it and introduce it, right? So it's surprising, even though I have I experienced joy by sitting in the tower, right? When we build an X, we're like right there, with the people.
Yeah. All right, cool. I think we're out of time now. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Check us out at nx.dev. And also go to connect.nrwl.io to sign up, and we've got a lot of great stuff put together that we'll be releasing soon. And otherwise, we'll see you around.
Bye.